Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and we're back at Just Thinking. Today, we're going to talk to a couple of folks who serve on the governance committee. Now, this may be a new name to you. That is the committee name. The committee is not that old, as we'll find out in our conversation. But they were appointed last year to try to do some examination and research into the town's government structure and how policies and practices work within that structure. And then they've been asked to come up with recommendations that go to the select board. And they have made some, and they're in their final stages of making changes and that kind of thing. And then there should be something on the town meeting warrant for the May annual town meeting where we all get to discuss their suggestions. So guys, let me introduce you. First, we've got Scott McKechnie, and Scott used to be on the finance committee. I think you guys can open your mics at this point. Hi, Scott.
Hey, Mary, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. And Len Engel, former planning board member.
Hey, Mary. Hey, Scott.
There.
Hey, Len.
Now, if we bring in the rest of the Brady bunch, we'll be all set. Anyway, okay, so just quickly, because a lot of people may not be familiar with you at all, Scott, would you just start and who you are, how long you've lived here, if you've been involved in other things besides the finance committee, and that should do it.
Yeah, so quickly, Scott McKechnie. I was on the FinCom for almost 9 years. I think that's 3 terms. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, actually when all the schools were being either renovated or built or whatever. So that was exciting times. Lived in town for 25 years or so, give or take. Involved in other community things, but nothing else with, municipality government here in town. I'm a banker by trade, and that's about it.
Sounds good. I remember those days. Another thing that was going on was the sewer project that didn't happen during your tenure. That was another one to add a little vanilla flavoring to the entire mess.
Barbara Gardner's famous stand up after the town meeting vote. I'll never forget it.
I forgot.
Well, that's never mind. We'll talk offline about that.
I'm trying to think. What did she say?
It's
Probably wasn't happy. But anyway.
No,
all right.
She was
Len,
disappointed is the word. She was disappointed.
Yeah. Well, hey, we went through a lot of work. I've been doing online chatting with people on Facebook about doing a long-range plan for the town, and over and over again, people ask about sewers. If I repeat, I've responded to the question as best I can, but in the end, it ended up being the state wasn't going to allow us to do it. But the process that we had to go through and the money that we spent and everything, it was lots of work. It was a long time. Anyway, and speaking of work, then there was the Casella situation with the planning board. How are you, Lynn?
I'm good. I'm good, Mary. Good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yeah, it has been. It has been. So what else have you been involved in? Can't remember.
10 years on the planning board. I came in, my wife and I moved into town in the late 90s, just as the sewer conversation was heating up, and moved onto Street, and they had a hole in front of my front yard for about 6 months. No, longer than that. I think 18 months in the road. So that was my introduction. I think probably somewhere in there, I decided, you know what, I think I need to get involved in this town. I don't know what I can offer, but that hole in my front yard is sort of, so I joined the planning board and did 2 terms on that, 10 years. And during that period, I also joined the community preservation committee and worked on that for, I think, for about 10 years, 11 years. So those 2 things occupied a lot of time, and then took a step back, but I've stayed interested and active. And when this opportunity came up, I said, well, it looks like fun.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Sam and I went back and forth with who actually recruited you, but I know Sam did. But at any rate, it was like, you sure I didn't do that? No. Anyway, guys, all right. So I think Sam used a number last night. You've had 22 meetings or something like that. And you started meeting when, August of last year was the appointment date, somewhere there around?
I think it was earlier than that. I think it was June. Is my
Okay. But that's a pretty accelerated pace for something. So let's start with when you were brought in on board and asked to do this stuff, what is it that the select board said to you was the mission of this whole thing? What was the reason for doing it? Len, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. There were, I think that the select board saw opportunities to improve the town's governance structure. I think they had ideas, but they didn't give us really any clarity. When and the mission is written fairly vaguely. As long as it, we're basically charged with analyzing the town's governance structure, the tasks each agency, department has, their responsibilities, and just figure out whether there are things that can be improved upon. And so that sort of set our course. We didn't have anything in particular that jumped out at us individually. I think as a group, we just started with a blank slate. Individually, we may have had ideas in the back of our heads of things that we've come across, but I think we started out from a position of where are the areas that most concern you, that things that we should take a look at. That's my recollection. Scott?
Yeah, it's funny because the last time, and Sam brought this up, but the last time that Holliston governance was reviewed was 40 years ago. 40 years ago. And I did a little research, and in 40 years ago, the two top hits on the radio were Celebration and Another One Bites the Dust. That's how long ago this was. President Reagan was in office. Mount St. Helen erupted. Princess Di and Charles got married. And what's interesting is the town budget was $10 million. $10 million.
And today it's what, 60?
60, 63. So there's been a lot of change. And I think that's really where we come into play here is, yes, there's a lot of change. How can we affect change? How can we make it better, more efficient? And so, the budget process was kind of a first task that we felt would benefit the town. There's a lot of noise going on with the budget process. We can talk. I know that's what we're going to talk about here. That's pretty much our number one mantra that we're working on. But and we'll talk about the best practices that we've learned from the other towns that we've talked to. But it really boils down to, I know the company I work for, we look at best practices every year. We probably have a deep dive every 5, not 40. 40 is a long time, and a lot of things have changed. So I wanted to put that in perspective.
The other thing that was different 40 years ago is that while our population hasn't jumped humongously, and I'm going to guess in my head it was around 12 or 13,000, it's taken since then to get us up to 15.
Yes.
So the numbers of people coming in has been slow, but what's been dramatic has been the number of housing units.
Yeah.
So while we used to have families of 5 and 6 kids, we don't have that any longer. And now you've got one kid, a pair of parents, or one parent, but a house, a whole house. So we've picked up a whole lot more units. We've picked up a lot more roads, picked up a lot more miles of water system. We picked up a whole lot, this, that, and the other thing. So let's jump into the finance thing. And we're really specifically talking about the budget and how the budget is developed. And I know it's a process that I personally have never, had spent a whole lot of time on. The back in the way back we did. But since there was a town administrator, and Paul was administrator all the time that I've been around, he was the one that basically carried the water on it. He was the one that, you know, did projections and tried to come up with the numbers and best guesses, and then went and met with people and this so forth. How are we trying to change that? I mean, I would assume that just kind of moved forward and went from Paul to Jeff Ritter and then on to today's town administrator, Travis Ahern.
Len, you want to take it? Want me to take it? We haven't rehearsed anything. We don't know who's going to.
Just anybody jump in.
I'm happy to take it if you don't want to.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Scott.
So you're absolutely right, Mary. Paul was here for 30 years, something like that. And when I was on the finance committee, Paul was the town administrator. And the process was pretty straightforward at the time. I did talk to Paul. He gave me an outline here. I could pull out some of his words, but the shortened version was, you know, he worked with the treasurer collector and the other finance people within the town to look at expected revenues and whatnot, came up with budgets, if you will, worked with a select board, worked with the finance committee. I mean, it was a team approach, no question about it. And then he would work with the individual departments that needed assistance, certainly the ones that the select board they reported to. He worked on those budgets, certainly helped the elected boards if they needed help. So my understanding, and this is where it's a little gray for me, because I was out of the town governance for a period of time, but my understanding when Jeff was the town administrator, a lot of that stopped. That wasn't his strengths. I don't know Jeff at all, never met him. And so the finance committee did a wonderful thing, stepped up and kind of carried the ball, which was, I think everybody appreciates that, no question about it. And now we've gone kind of full circle and brought in Travis. And so Travis has a fantastic municipal finance background. Today's municipal financing and government is much more complicated than it's ever been. And so, you know, one of the things we felt, and again, best practices, we can talk about that, is that to kind of go back to, you know, what other towns are doing, what, you know, Travis is here to do, is to kind of be the shepherd, like Paul was, you know, with the budget process, include the select board, include the finance committee. And so let everybody kind of do what they did before and have him shepherd the process. So, you know, Len, you can add to that if you want, please do. But that's kind of the big picture, where it was, what the issue was, how it was solved, and why we think we've got the person in place, at least today, and hopefully for a long time, that can kind of shepherd it again.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only other thing I'd add, and I think that's pretty comprehensive, Scott, is the absence of clarity in our current bylaws. So I think the circumstances that Scott discussed, where Paul largely ran the ship, developed the budget, went through the select board and FinCom, included everybody necessary who had any budget stake in the game. That when that sort of fell apart and the town administrator didn't take that ball and move it forward, it showed the weakness of our bylaws. We didn't have a guideline for a singular guideline for that process. And then as Scott indicated, we have a $63 million town budget. We have nearly 800 staff, employees of the town. It serves 15,000 people. It's a pretty important responsibility, and it's a hugely important document. Town meeting has final decision, every May to come and approve this, and it takes an awful lot to get to that point. And we didn't have a bylaw that articulated the process that should happen in order to prepare that. And when we looked to these other towns, each of us, we split up the list. Each of us contacted a handful of town administrators and other officials to get a sense of what they did, who was responsible, what does the process look like in your town. We saw very clearly that Holliston was an outlier. These towns had first taken advantage of their professional financial staff. They had town administrators with experience. They had, treasurers, tax collectors. They had, folks that their full-time job in town was to manage the town's finances. And so we sort of saw that the results of that analysis and figured this was an opportunity to sort of professionalize and develop, codify the process for budget development in a single location. The proposal from the governance committee is a bylaw that contemplates every step of the process. It assigns, sets timelines. It has deliverables. It includes it pretty much. It looks very similar, I think, to what Paul did. The responsibility resides in the town administrator, but relies heavily on the other boards, and then the relationship with FinCom and the select board.
As I hear that, and I have read your proposal and all of the many iterations of it, it seemed to me that it was more that we were kind of going back to the kind of process that we had with Paul, with maybe a couple of exceptions, one being that you're going to put it in practice and you're going to write it down and it's going to be posted and everybody's going to know about it. And of course, that's new. But I also think that by spelling it out, we're able now to say, okay, somebody's responsible. There's got to be, that's probably my biggest thing. Sitting on a 3 or 5 or 7 member board, who's responsible if something goes wrong? There's just this never ending question. So yes, people say to me, well, we could always not elect them again. That process can take 4 years before you completely rotate a board. Could be longer if it was a bigger board. So it's not quick, it's not easy, it's not to identify who's accountable. So if I read everything and I jump to my own, conclusion, then the town administrator is now, according to your plan, going to be responsible for whatever comes out. Is that a fair assessment? Either one of you want to answer?
Is the town administrator responsible? I would say the town administrator is the shepherd. He's the one that's moving the product through the process. And the product is a result of a lot of input from a lot of different people, including the select board, including the FinCom. And so it will be a select board's presentation or their presentation with the finance committee's recommendations, number 1, on the floor. I mean, that's the way it worked. That's kind of similar to the way it worked before. And that's the way it works in almost every other town we talk to. And one thing, Mary, to point out is that this isn't to solve an issue today. This is to put it in for the next generation of select board members, finance committee members, department heads, whoever that might be. And again, some of the towns I talked to, when I asked them the question, they said, you guys don't have one? They were shocked. And they said, I wouldn't have taken this job in whatever town if they didn't have it in writing. And then it was, thank God we had it in writing because we lost 3 people or 4 senior people, whatever, in whatever roles in the town. And it was a guide. It was a roadmap of how we, what each person did and how we needed to find that replacement. So that's really what this is for. This isn't to pick anything apart. This isn't to change roles and responsibilities. It's the roadmap. And I think it's clarity, it's efficiency, which we need, right? Less duplication of presentations, if that's possible. I mean, we heard that from the townspeople. So that's really what this is about.
I know I, over the years, have been asked by department heads and stuff if it always was the case that they had to as one in particular put it, sing for his supper in front of the select board and then the finance committee and then maybe back to the select board and, you know, this never ending process. Does this address that? Does it limit that kind of exposure?
It does. It does. There'll probably be maybe 2 bites at the apple, but instead of multiple. But the primary responsibility will be the town administrator to meet with all the boards. The town administrator with FinCom and support from FinCom and the select board is gonna develop a financial statement to guidance for all town boards and departments to put together their budgets. Here's our financial picture. Here's your slice of it. Here, you know, this is the parameters that you have to work with. Similar to what's been going on for years and years. And then they're going to respond to that. There's going to be meetings between the town administrator and individual boards about their budgets. Those budgets will get sent to town administrator. The ones that the select board is responsible for, they'll get rolled up. The select board will review those. Then there's the independent boards. They'll submit their budgets. All of that will go to the town administrator, who will package it up into an operating budget and send it to the select board, who will have a certain time frame to hold a public hearing and then issue a decision. This is what we would like to adopt. They'll send it to FinCom. FinCom will have their opportunity. They can then review all of the financial information that the boards, committees, departments have had sent to the town administrator, and they'll have a public hearing, and they may also have interaction with those individual budget writers to ask them questions about the budget. But that will be for the FinCom to develop their own recommendations as to what they think should be changed in the budget, and that will be something that they present to town meeting. So there'll basically be one big opportunity, and that will be with the town administrator to make your case for your budget.
Okay, so many questions. So does the select board get to change a budget from another duly elected board like planning board? So if the budget comes, you said at some point the town administrator will see it. Can he change it? Or is it just that he's doing a review and moving it along?
So elected boards and the school committee, the concept is the select board do not have the oversight to make any changes to their budgets.
Okay.
So I think that answers your question.
Yeah, because obviously you run into the issue that they're just as much elected as the select board is. So they really don't have that authority under law.
Right.
And it probably shouldn't, you know, unless you change the structure, but that's a whole different day. So then is there any, well, I know that the finance committee is a little concerned about some of what you've got in here. And I think one of the issues for them is they already have a functioning practice that they like the way it goes. Why aren't we just putting that into the bylaw?
I don't think we're changing their functionality whatsoever. Review, recommend. That's what they've always done. And that's we're 100% supportive, and that is a huge role in this whole budget process. And they have the first voice at town meeting. And again, when I was on FinCom, I remember people coming up to me and said, you know, we really value your time, your effort, your recommendations. So it's a very valuable role. What we're saying is they're not going to be the shepherds of the process. They have a role. The town administrator is here for a reason. He's the full-time CFO, if you will, of the town. And that's what we're doing. We're just moving the role, but not the response. FinCom's responsibilities are spelled out, not spelled out. We haven't touched those at all. We think, again, it's a valuable process. And I think the town members really take that to heart too, when their recommendations on the floor. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We used to have debates at town meeting where a department might feel one way and the finance committee might recommend otherwise. Is that a possibility under this scenario?
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Sure. Where they have their role. They are autonomous to make their recommendations, and people listen. But
do.
absolutely, that's not the intent to change their review and recommendations whatsoever.
The thing is that historically, or in the last few years, we haven't had that kind of discussion on town meeting floors. So there is and because everything has gone, everybody's come to agreement before it's gone to town meeting.
Well, again, I'll go back to my tenure, and that was probably the case then too, right? There's, you start with a pot like this, and of course, everybody's got a little bit, I want more, but there's only a pot. And then once you get through the process, there are some differences, and hopefully the town administrator, the select board, and the FinCom will meet before the final draft and iron out 100% of the issues would be ideal, but there's going to be a few, there usually is, and let either the townspeople decide or whatever, but absolutely. That's what I anticipate would happen.
And there'll be ample opportunity for FinCom and the select board to hear that, to work that stuff through. The questions that come to the town administrator will also be that'll be worked out through the select board and FinCom. They'll have opportunities to meet. There'll be public hearings on it. We expect a very similar process, but we also expect that there'll be times where there'll be disagreements, and that's what town meeting is for.
Exactly. And actually, I favor any possible town meeting to weigh in when there are differences, rather than boards deciding when there are differences, who's going to win and who's going to lose. But anyway, so nothing's been subtracted from the responsibilities of the finance committee. They continued. Okay, the only difference is who's moving the budget through the process, and that is now being vested completely in the town administrator. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Okay, I'll make sure I have that right. And what is the long range is there? Putting the budget together for town meeting requires pulling in information from not just the departments and that kind of stuff, but you've got all of the capital planning kind of stuff. Where does that fall into this? Because they've been working at having a separate capital plan, and just trying to figure out how does that plug into the budget process.
So I'll take it first, then I'll let Len finish it up. So our recommendation is to have the capital plan budget presented at the Springtown meeting along with the operating budget. Very consistent with a lot of the other towns. We did our own research. Actually, Paul did quite a bit of it. And oddly enough, about 50% of all the capital spending happens in either the fall or the spring. So, historically, it's kind of it's not all spent in one, before one meeting or the other. So it's financial driven. Obviously, it's capital. And again, most other towns said, why wouldn't you have it done? And I get the whole thing about free cash and all that, but they make those adjustments anyway. So, but that being said, the whole capital planning committee, which we're recommending gets put in place. Len, I'll let you, if you want to talk about that, what we're suggesting.
Sure. So that's another one of the changes, and that's a change from currently we have a capital planning program that is largely run through FinCom. That is not the recommendation is to scrap that process and then create a capital planning committee that is responsible for assessing capital planning needs, meeting with all the various departments and boards, and pulling all that information together. It's going to be an appointed group, 7 members. I think there's 2 town members. There's a school committee,
business man, and then the facilities person. Those are the 2 automatics.
Yep. And then appointees that will include FinCom. They'll put together all of the various budgets and expenditures, look at the capital needs, do an analysis of revenue and what the future looks like, and hand that over to town administrator. The town administrator will then have the responsibility of putting together a 5-year capital planning or capital expenditure plan, and that will then go through the select board and FinCom. Select board will make changes based on that year's operating budget. That will be included in the operating budget, and FinCom will have its opportunity to review the 5-year plan and the plan to the degree it affects the coming fiscal year budget. And then
Right now, the capital plan is a subcommittee of the FinCom, right? It's
Yep.
the planning committee. So why change that?
So I think the goal was to bring in folks who represent those the other various groups that are part of that capital planning. So give them more of a voice, have it more structured around this membership, pulling together information from across town departments and boards, and then having that document, that summary, then get delivered to the town administrator, and then the town administrator, as part of his responsibilities as a CFO and for putting together the operating budget, to have the responsibility for developing that plan and then determining what parts of that plan are going to be part of the operating budget for the ensuing fiscal year.
Again, Mary, the review and the recommendations still run through the FinCom. That doesn't change. It's just shepherding the process is shifted to the town administrator. Well, I'm sorry, take it back, to this group, which would then share their recommendations to the town administrator.
Yeah.
So along the way, if you end up with competition for always limited funds, is it a negotiation, a conversation, or is it just that the town administrator is deciding in with this and out with that? How does
No,
that?
I think the town administrator takes this recommendation to the select board, and the select board then shares it with the FinCom. Again, it's a team approach. It's not one person saying yay or nay. That's what we're really moving away from. It's town administrator doing their job. They have the ears to most departments. They're in most meetings. And again, shepherd the process and have the select board have their input, have the FinCom with their input, put a final product together, again, to the town with first say coming from the finance committee. It's no different than the operating budget, but it's the capital budget.
I know it's been a criticism lodged against us many times that we so rely on volunteer boards that sometimes processes take too long. So to me, it is good to have somebody available during the day, every day, who can answer somebody's question about how something was put together. So the concept of having it be in town hall with someone is, it actually appeals to me there. I want to know what you think the biggest obstacle will be in getting support for this. Have you run into conflicts over it?
We've had 22 meetings, and I would say 20 of the 22 have been extremely well received.
Okay.
There's been some great feedback, some recommendations.
Yeah.
We have this talent pool, which we can talk about, but it was a recommendation that we have a policy on that. I think based on our conversations, that maybe that doesn't have to be a policy. That's a great idea, but let's put a talent pool together, because there are people in town that would love to volunteer. What's needed and everything else. So if we have somebody that's sitting on the sidelines, someone can reach into that talent pool and say, Scott, this is what we need. Are you interested? Type thing. So that's the idea.
Yeah, that's part of your proposal, right? So that in fact you have this, I'm assuming it's going to be somehow done online, that
Yes.
the information would be available online, but that people who are interested in participating in town government, and there are people who are interested in participating, and seriously, if I ask somebody if they're interested in participating in something, most of the time I get a yes. It's just they need to be asked. and they need to have it explained to them what the job is. What is it they're going to be doing?
I can
So
tell you from personal experience, Mary, you bring a little bit more than just an ask. You're very,
Oh, gentlemen.
you're a persuasive individual.
But
Okay.
I have her cell phone number blocked on my phone.
But I think
Unfortunately,
to your
too
point, Mary, this is, I mean, a talent bank provides, and it's something that I know when I moved into town 20 some odd years ago, I didn't know what various town, boards needed people and what their responsibilities were. The idea is to put that together in one place, have it on the website, and say, okay, so here's the plan. You're interested in planning board? Here's what they do. Here's what, here's the 5 current members, this is, they have experience in doing these things, but, professional town planner, things like that. I think that can be really helpful. I had no place to look when I moved into town a while back. Here's a central location. You have availability of boards up for election, appointment, things like that. So I think that's a real benefit. And it's as Scott said, we got a lot of kudos for identifying that as an opportunity and a need for the town.
I think it's a great idea. I really do. And I did, Paul and I did a show, Town Government 101, and a large group of people, over 20, were from the Indian population in town. And they were starving for information about where do I go if I want to volunteer? What are the kinds of positions that are available? And it's really, really hard to explain that. It really is. You have to know more than they probably know to begin with. But, one of them has actually stepped forward to take out papers to run for office. So I felt like the entire effort was worth it, because at least, finding people to run sometimes is a challenge, but reaching into the diverse population is a bigger challenge. And, so anything that we can do that encourages people, I think it's great. It's great. Is there anything that jumps out at you guys that you really want to make sure that we have the public understand about this?
The only thing I would say, and it came up the other night, we've been, I think, this is a 3-year term for this governance committee. So
Okay. Good point.
This is one of several, and I don't have a number. I think none of us have a number of recommendations that we're going to make. And again, it's recommendations hopefully to better assist future town members in whatever position they may be in, within the town. This isn't change for the sake of change, but again, I think it's important. I think it's important for us to do our digging. Again, best practices. It was pushed back. If Holliston's so good, why do we need best practices from somebody else? Well, that's a neutral stance, and if you're in neutral, everybody's going by you. So we haven't reviewed, as I said, in 40+ years. We're making that review now. We're going to make recommendations, and we're going to listen to. Like I said, we've had 22 meetings just on pretty much this one topic, and we plan on having that for probably the next several topics that we want to tackle. And we plan on having 1 or 2 public hearings on this either next week or the week after, I forget when it is, to get feedback from townspeople, to ask us questions. We've put a lot of time into this, and that's fine. That's what volunteers do. But I think the end product, the responses that we've been getting have been very, very positive, which is great.
Well, you hate to get the negative feedback after all that work, huh?
Well, change.
But I think that
change is hard to accept for people, right? I get that.
Change is hard, but the reality of it is, and somebody posted this the other day on my on a page that I'm talking about the long-range planning. And she said, why do we keep saying we're going to preserve the small town? We're not a small town. Let's just stop and recognize you're a mid-sized community, and you've certainly got a budget that's a whole lot bigger than a small town. $63 million is not It's nothing to snivel at. So what has changed is the community has changed, but government has not necessarily kept pace with it. And you're just trying to bring it into sync with what's out there now for demand and expectation. I think that people who move here from other parts of the country who don't know anything about town meeting form of government really, really struggle. So I'm going to put in a plug in the same way that you're talking about for volunteers and stuff. Put your thinking caps on as to what you can do to provide information to people who move here from someplace else. What kind of product can we put on that website that's like, so you want to know how this town works kind of thing, that makes them understand where they go for different things. You know, it's not easy. And if they come from county government or something like that, I mean, they are totally perplexed by us. And then when they ask, so who makes the decision? Well, that's a decision we make at town meeting. So when can I go to town meeting? Well, that happens twice a year. Staggering to them. You mean you only make decisions twice a year? How do you get anything done? Those are legitimate questions.
Yeah.
You may not have the answers for all of them or any of them, but the point is the town has changed. The expectations have changed. We're not just a bunch of folks who've grown up in this area. I am, but you know, okay, so it's not that way anymore. Anyway, that was my little pitch. Anything you guys want to add to this?
I think you mentioned something really important. If this is the town, the opportunity to make change is, it actually happens more than twice a year. And it happens on all these boards and committees, and it happens on things like the governance committee as we're digging through, you know, our history of bylaws and decision-making on financial decisions and budget creation. But it also, it reminds you, you said that we have, you know, two town meetings where decisions are made. It's all the more important that the guidance that the town provides at those meetings is clear and provides those boards, those individuals, the town staff, the professionals we have with the guidance the town expects to carry out those functions between those town meetings. And that's, I mean, I think that's at the root of this, of this budget development bylaw and the other supporting bylaws, is that this is designed to give guidance, the step-by-step process along the way, so that for that, you don't have to worry for that 6 months. This process is happening. These people are responsible, they're professionals. And when you sit down at town meeting, you're gonna have a very well-developed town budget that you could vote on. And you may not agree with it, and that's why you could vote nay, but it's there, and you've had this process, and it's very transparent.
Okay, well, I'm putting in a plug for long-range planning too.
I'm sure that's on our list somewhere.
Yeah, well, I really am working at putting something on the warrant. It may end up being a citizen's petition just to make sure that it gets there. But I just think in the same way that you're talking, there are ways in which plans can provide guidance to fill in the blank. It doesn't matter which committee or board or department you're talking about. But what I've seen over the years is, you know, we'll come up with the plan, but we don't have that implementation piece in. There's no governance, if you will, about how it gets implemented. And that may be something that I can have a chat with your committee about at some point when you next meet, because I have an idea. I want to run by somebody that's smarter than me. Okay. All right. Last plugs.
See you,
No,
Tony.
thank you, because one of the questions we asked each other probably a few weeks back was, how do we get this information out to the townspeople? And this is certainly a great venue to do that. We've come up with some other ideas as well. So if you have other ideas, please share them with us. But I think this has been very helpful, again, to get what we're doing, why, and what this recommendation is all about. You know, I don't know how many people listen in on a weekly basis that you have this, but thank you for having us on, and this has been very helpful.
Agree.
Well, remember, it's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, It's on television. I mean, we do flood the airwaves, you know,
I will
and
say-
it repeats.
Yep, I will say one thing, on the town's website, we've got our own sub-website on there. And we've got a fair amount of information, some of the spreadsheets and some of the towns that we've been talking to. So all that's listed. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. So the townspeople.
Send us the link for that. Send us the link for that,
Will do.
because then we can put it as a banner across the bottom or whatever. You know,
You do,
people can,
Glenn, I'm not good at that.
okay,
We'll get it.
never mind, I'll get it.
We'll get it done. Yeah. We'll get it done. And we'll,
Not a problem, Scott. Somebody takes care of your tech for you, is that it?
No, pretty good tech wise, but I got too many other links that I got to send around. But
All right, we'll let you off the hook on that one. All right, well, thank you so very much for spending the time with me. I appreciate it. I think you were both very clear in explaining, and I think that's going to be the challenge at town meeting as well. Just trying to keep it, dumb it down for those of us who don't, well, I do live and breathe this stuff, but for people who don't live and breathe this stuff, we have to get it to the point where it's understandable. And I don't mean dumb in the sense that they don't understand, that they're dumb, but rather, you know, we use acronyms, we use the terms, we use whatever, and it's really annoying. All right, well, thanks so much, guys.
thanks,
Thanks.
Mary.
you're welcome. Take care.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thanks. And
Bye-bye.
hold on, and we'll be disconnecting in just a minute.
Okay.
Thanks very much for joining us, and we will be back in about a week. I've got another show coming up in about a week, more on government. What else? All right, this is the best season. This is my favorite because we got elections and everything else, so I get to do all that stuff. All right, folks, thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.